This is lecture 6 on Kant's philosophy of the self in the critique of pure reason. Now, in the last lecture, lecture 5, I talked about the problem of many minds. That's chapter 4. And I also have to, today I'm going to talk about many selves of the mind. Now, I talked about all kinds of intuition in lecture 4. Today I'll talk about all kinds of selves. And well, some people have asked, what's the difference between phenomenal self and empirical self? There's no difference between phenomenal self and empirical self. And some people ask the difference between noumenal self and real self. There is really no difference between noumenal self and the real self, but there's a distinction between phenomenal self and noumenal self. And there's also a difference between transcendental ego or transcendental unity of our perception and phenomenal self. So I don't have a whiteboard, so I just wrote on a piece of paper about the difference among the selves in Kant's philosophy. And actually, Kant makes for Kant there are 4 selves. You might think that's kind of strange. How there can be 4 selves? I'll show you that. Now, well, before I talk about the 4 selves, if you have read Robert Stevenson's book, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the man has 2 characters. That's the same man, but one can be Dr. Jekyll, and the same man can be Mr. Hyde. So for Stevenson, there are 2 selves. See? So there are 2 selves, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Likewise, Kant has 4 selves. I'll show them here. You can see this. So there are 4 selves. Number 1, phenomenal self, which is empirical self. Noumenal self, which is real self. And 3, transcendental ego. Also, he sometimes called it unity of our perception or transcendental unity of our perception. And in his moral theory, he talks about moral self. The 4th one, moral self, can be also called a rational agent. So there are 4 selves in Kant's philosophy of mind. And you might find it, why are there 4 selves? There should be 1 self, but if you have watched my videos, he makes all kinds of distinctions about selves. So this is what you have to know. Now, phenomenal self or empirical self is what is known as me, or Steve, or Andy, or John, or Mary, or Kathy, or Nancy. I mean, just the ordinary people. They are empirical selves, phenomenal selves. But as I said, each phenomenal self has to have its own noumenal self or real self to be treated as a human being, to be treated as someone with dignity. Human being cannot be a mere appearance or a mere phenomenon. It is a phenomenal self, but the noumenal self or the real self has to underlie that phenomenal self. Otherwise, phenomenal self will be just like a phenomenal tree or phenomenal wall or a phenomenal chair or a phenomenal desk. Like me, I'm a phenomenon appearing on your computer screen, but I'm just a phenomenal self. But what's the difference between phenomenal self like me and a phenomenal chair here? Well, what distinguishes human being from just simple empirical objects? Human beings also has a noumenal and real character. And Kant never really, Kant really talks about those different selves, but he doesn't make it clear. So that's why I show this this piece of paper. I don't have a whiteboard, so you just write this down. And he also talk about he really doesn't care, or he doesn't really think about other minds, other people's minds. He doesn't even really talk about how the other people's minds interact with each other, or how other people's minds interact with my mind. So that's the issue I talked about in the chapter 4 of my book. See, chapter 4. You have to have this with you, all right? It's chapter 4. Chapter 4, excuse me. Chapter 4, the problem of many minds. And I have to talk about that again on today, and maybe in the next lecture as well, because the problem of many minds is really a big issue in the critique of, Kant never really pondered, never really thought about them, but it really creates all kinds of difficulties in Kant's philosophy. Now, I said Kant never really thought about or wrote about the problem of other minds in the critique of pure reason. That is true, but there are a few passages which suggest the existence of other minds in the critique of pure reason, and one of them is in the paralogism A. Now, before I went into lecture 5, I said I will skip lecture 3 of my writing. This lecture, chapter 3, I said I would skip this, but in this chapter, page 12, not page 12, but page 13, I said, I quoted from the Critique of Pure Reason. It says, that's in the third paralogism, A. Kant says, if I view myself from the standpoint of another person as object of his outer intuition, it is this outer observer who first represents me in time. This is about other selves, how I am viewed by another human being. But this is like the only part, or maybe one of very few parts of the Critique of Pure Reason. Kant talks about the existence of other minds. Okay? So I said many times in lecture 5, there are 6 billion empirical selves or phenomenal selves. You might wonder why 6 billion. Well, the world population is said to be 6 billion. Maybe it's close to 7 billion. So you can say 7 billion, but there are 6 or 7 billion people living on this earth, and that's just like there are 6 billion people, 7 billion people is just like saying there's 6 billion phenomenal selves or 7 billion phenomenal selves. Either way is fine. But Kant never talks about the problem of other minds, and what complicates is there are many minds, and also, in fact, there are many minds. Just Kant is not conscious of it. He's not aware of that. But he also separates each mind into 4 selves, like a phenomenal self, noumenal self, transcendental ego, and moral self. And this, my teacher, Robert Paul Wolff, really makes it clear in his book, The Autonomy of Reason. Now, Bob Wolff wrote a Kant's theory of mental activity in 1963, the year President Kennedy got shot. And 10 years later, in 1973, he wrote The Autonomy of Reason. And the Kant's theory of mental activity is the book on transcendental analytic of a critique of pure reason. It's pretty much a book on Kant's theory of knowledge. But what he wrote in 1973, The Autonomy of Reason, was on Kant's philosophy of morals, ethics. So that I show the book. This is a very good book, The Autonomy of Reason, commentary on the groundwork of metaphysical morals. And Kant's theory of mental activity was a commentary on the transcendental analytic of the critique of pure reason. But this book, written in 1973, 10 years after Kant's theory of mental activity, this is a book about Kant's ethics. It's reprinted by Peter Smith in 1986. I don't know if you can still get this. Peter Smith is the company which publish the books which have gone out of print. They used to do it, but I don't know if the company still exists. But if you can get this in the, you can buy it, or if you can get it in the library, you should read this. And in this Autonomy of Reason, Bob Wolff explains in the introduction, page 9 of his introduction, the 4 cells of Kant's philosophy. The 4 cells of Kant's philosophy, here. This is what you should read, and I've already, I mean, he has explained very well about the relationships among 4 selves in the introduction to the Autonomy of Reason. So what I say might be just a repetition of what he says, but when we think about it, even in our daily life, you can say, he has 2 characters. He can be very nice sometimes, but he can get very nasty. Which of his characters are real him? Well, I don't know. Maybe both of them. Just as I said, Stevenson said there are Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The same man has 2 characters. For Kant, every man, every human being has 4 selves. Now, how this is very difficult issues, and Kant's philosophy is, as I repeatedly have said, is based on the appearance-reality distinction. Based on the phenomena-noumena dichotomy, and even the self is no exception. I know myself only as I appear to myself. I know things only as they appear to me, because I don't know what they are in themselves. I don't know the reality. I don't know things in themselves. So I don't know myself. I just know myself as I appear to myself. I said I explained those things in lecture 4. Now, to well, this is a pretty heavy issue, and I'm kind of puzzled as well. Now, for there to be one cosmos, one world, there can be only one self in itself, or transcendental ego, or Kant says transcendental unity of a perception. Because there's one world, one cosmos, one nature, because there's one unity, transcendental unity of a perception, or transcendental ego, which you can call the activity of the noumenal self. But since, as I said, there are 6 billion or 7 billion people in the world, there can be 6 billion unities. Wait. If there's 6 billion unities, how can there be one nature, one cosmos? I mean, there was chaos at the beginning, according to the Bible, and God created the universe. God created cosmos. But for Kant, he doesn't care if God is a creator of the cosmos. Kant says the mind, human mind, is the lawgiver to nature. It's not God who creates the universe, but it's the human being, not divine being, but human being, the mind of the human being, which gives the law to nature, which synthesizes the manifold, which synthesize and organize the chaos and make it into the cosmos. So there must be one unity, transcendental unity of our perception, which gives one and the same law to nature, and thus there exists one very organized cosmos. But if there are many transcendental egos, many noumenal selves, many unities, how can there be one cosmos, one world? There should be only one unity. There should be only one unity of our perception. But if each one of 6 billion people has his or her own transcendental unity of our perception, there are many unities. There are 6 billion unities. So there can be 6 billion universes. There can be 6 billion worlds. That's weird. Or there can be 6 billion laws of nature. As I said in lecture 5, it then is just a lucky accident. 6 billion people give one and the same law to nature. Then this world is not necessary. I mean, Kant's question in the Critique of Pure is, how are synthetic judgments knowable a priori? How can there be necessary connection between cause and effect? How can this world be ruled by one law? If there's only one self in itself, one transcendental ego, one noumenal, one transcendental perception of one transcendental unity of perception, that's fine. So to make sense out of Kant's philosophy of knowledge, if his theory in the critique of pure reason is valid, there can be room only for one noumenal self or one transcendental unity, then that's fine. All right, well, it's kind of weird. Like 6 billion people, 6 billion phenomenal selves are there. All appearances is of one and the same noumenal self. That's kind of weird. Because people like Steve, Andy, John, Mary, Kathy, Nancy, Anne, Penny, and myself are all the appearance of the same noumenal self. So we are all the same people. We appear differently, we appear separately, we are all appearances of the one and the same soul or transcendental ego, transcendental unity of perception. Well, that's kind of weird, but that's the only way to read, to understand Kant's critique of pure reason. There can be room for only one self in itself, and every other self is just the appearance of one and the same self. Well, you might find it very strange. It really is not common sense, but Kant is a philosopher. He's one of the, or maybe the greatest philosopher in the history of human in the history of philosophy. But to make out of sense of his theory of morals, each phenomenal self has to have his own noumenal self. So just as there must be as many noumenal selves as there are phenomenal selves. So if there are 6 billion phenomenal selves, if there are 6 billion people, there must be 6 billion phenomenal selves and 6 billion noumenal selves or transcendental egos, each one of them responding to its own phenomenal self. For instance, Bob has to be the appearance. Bob's phenomenal self has to be the appearance of Bob's noumenal self. Steve's phenomenal self has to be the appearance of Steve's noumenal self. Andy's phenomenal self has to be the appearance of Andy's noumenal self. Nancy's phenomenal self has to be the appearance of Nancy's noumenal self. Penny's phenomenal self must be the appearance of the Penny's noumenal self. Kathy's phenomenal self must be the appearance of the Kathy's noumenal self. Fine, because to treat other people with beings with dignity, those other people cannot just be phenomena. If you just say they're just appearances, they're just phenomena, they're just like phenomena trees. Even if you hit the tree, no one calls you violent. Or I mean, they might call you violent. I mean, no one calls you. You hit the tree, you touch the tree, you push the tree. No one really say you are unjust, immoral. And if human being has the status of a tree, phenomenal self has the same status as a phenomenal tree or phenomenal desk. I mean, there's nothing wrong, nothing immoral about pushing him or hitting him or punching him. Nothing. Because other people are just phenomena. Well, those are the things. So to treat other people as ends, not just as means, Kant has to prove each human being, each one of 6 billion people, each one of our 6 billion phenomenal selves has to have his or her own noumenal self. Now, this creates really serious problems in his philosophy, and there will be a very serious contradiction between Kant's theory of morals, and his theory of knowledge. So there's a contradiction between Kant's ethics and Kant's epistemology. Kant never really thought about these contradictions. Well, just think about this. I mean, what I said in today's lecture might be very odd and strange, but as I go on to lecture 7, I will more deeply investigate Kant's philosophy of the selves. So please read chapter 4 again very carefully. Chapter 4 of my Kant's philosophy of the self. Kant's philosophy of the self. This is my thesis, and I don't know if I can show both Bob Wolff and Bob Slaver on my committee. They're very good people. Bob Wolff is a best Kantian. He's an expert on Kant, and Bob Slaver is an expert on Leibniz. And I wrote this thesis many years ago. So for next week, well, I don't know if it's next week, but for next lecture, I suggest you to read chapter 4 again, and just when you reread chapter 4, just keep in mind the difference among the 4 selves. Okay, I'll show it again. Okay, you see this? I think you see this. Okay, there are 4 selves in Kant's philosophy, and this is about it today. I mean, lecture 5 was pretty long, and some people thought lecture 5 was too long, and each lecture should be about a half hour. Sometimes I talk longer than half an hour. Sometimes I talk shorter than half hour, but I think it's pretty appropriate to end each lecture in 30 minutes, half hour. So I wouldn't talk too long today. I just hope you will review the past 5 videos I created, and you will reread chapter 4 of Kant's philosophy of the self. I hope to see you soon, maybe 2 weeks, I'm not quite sure. But to this Kant's philosophy of the self is really the base of Kant's whole system. Kant's philosophy is really philosophy of the self. So just remember that. So I hope to see you again. So next lecture will be lecture 7, lucky 7.